Okay, it's my pleasure to welcome today an Alexander Technique instructor. And this is somebody that I've been wanting to bring to the attention of music lovers for a long time. Her name is Noel Hearn, and she teaches Alexander Technique at UCLA, among other places. I believe she's been doing this for 3 years there, but she was previously with USC, and she'll tell us a little bit more in detail about that. She also teaches um, piano skills, I think, like a piano lab, piano pedagogy, or vocal pedagogy. She will clarify everything about her experience, but mainly today, the important thing is she's trained as a musician. She also is trained as a choral conductor. She used to play the violin, the piano. So she's a perfect person for musicians if they're interested to get to learn more about Alexander Technique and what it is. So Noel, welcome and thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So let's jump right in and tell me about Alexander Technique. What is it exactly, and why is this something relevant for musicians?
Well, so Alexander technique is a movement technique. It teaches you how to observe your primarily physical responses to stimuli and to be able to identify any areas of excess tension and get rid of them. So we're basically doing two things. We're learning to accurately identify habitual responses to stimuli, which could be anything from as soon as you pick up your violin and hold it, how you're holding your shoulders and your arms, what you're doing with your back, or it could even be when your phone dings, do you reach without thinking? What are you doing with your body? And then the other thing is we're testing F.M. Alexander's theory, who is the guy who created the technique, that what happens at the atlanto-occipital joint, where the skull meets the spine, affects your overall coordination.
Cool.
So that is to say, if you imagine I have a less pleasant example and a super pleasant example. So we'll start with less pleasant. If you watch any Animal Planet show where one land mammal is hunting the other one, when they go to reach for the mammal, they go for the neck. So that's the unpleasant one. Sorry, apologies. I am vegan, I promise. It gets better. The other example would be like a mama cat picking up her babies. She picks them up from the scruff of the neck. So we have this inherent knowledge that what happens where our skull meets our spine affects the overall coordination of our systems. We just kind of lose track of it. And it's a lot to do with chairs and desks and all of the things that make modern civilization what it is. Phones, crikey, phones and computers are just
And looking down the whole time.
looking down. Yeah. So like when Alexander was creating the technique, it was Victorian England. So like the late 1800s and early 1900s. He died in like mid-century. So people back then were very like, think corsets and very upright. So people were pulling what we would call back if back is behind me, and down if down is to the ground. People were pulling back and down with their heads. So think of like a very snooty, posture. And these days we're pulling, because of the stupid rectangle, we're pulling forward and down. So we're dealing with slightly different circumstances, but all of the principles are still applicable.
Wow. So to better understand how you got started with this, tell me about your training. You're a musician first and foremost. You were also a radio host, I understand. And how did you come across Alexander Technique, and how did you decide to train to become an instructor?
Well, when I was in graduate school at LSU, I was good friends with the movement professor in the theater department. Movement being, like stage fighting and, actually he's the co-founder of the dance troupe Diavolo. Do you know this one?
I
It's
don't.
an athletic, similar to Cirque du Soleil, but on a smaller scale.
Oh,
Acrobatic dance company. Anyway, he told me about it and it just kind of sounded interesting. And there was the residential course happening in summer. So my best friend and I just drove up to Virginia from Louisiana and went to this course. And the thing is, most people are drawn to Alexander Technique because they're in pain. It's really, really, really good for pain management. It gets rid of a whole lot of things like sciatica, back pain, neck strain, all of those sorts of things. So most people come to it because of pain or because of performing arts, because a lot of performing arts programs have AT built in. Ours did not, at least at the time. So I just like went up just to see. And what struck me the most was all of these teachers who had been teaching for decades look, even in their 70s and 80s, they look 20 years younger. They're moving with ease, going, you know, sitting cross-legged on the floor and getting right up without creaking, cracking, moaning, and all of these things. Like the health of their joints and their ability to move with ease was just so striking. It stuck with me for a long time, and it just kind of rattled around in my brain until finally, it took me, I think, 8 years to actually move out to California and do the training program.
Wonderful, wonderful. So it was straight from your personal interest and seeing how beneficial it was to others.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm from South Louisiana. And when I was in the radio business, I was in central Mississippi, which are both terribly unhealthy places. You know, so seeing an alternative way to age well and healthfully that's not, now you have to exercise 8 hours a day and only eat celery and drink water, which is fine if that's your jam. But, you know, I want to eat pizza and drink whiskey if I want to, you know? So, but just seeing a way to age gracefully and healthfully and maintain this poise and energy and range of movement was extraordinary. And that's what sold me.
Wonderful. So perhaps this could be a good moment for me to ask you if you wouldn't mind showing some basic methods, postures, stretches, anything that could be beneficial to musicians particularly.
Sure. Okay. So I want to, like, my disclaimer, not disclaimer, but blanket statement, I guess, is if you have a body, Alexander technique is applicable to you. Obviously, if your instrument is your focus, we can focus on that. But if you have a body, AT is for you. So in any AT lessons or group classes or anything like that, we do very simple things like sitting, standing, and walking all the time. So I'm going to move around a little bit. I have my chair here. So I always ask people in first lessons just to sit down without thinking and to stand up without thinking. So I'm going to imitate someone who's not me. So if I'm going to shift this down a little bit. You may not be able to see my face, but that's not the important part. Okay, so a normal person, if they just sat down, would and end up kind of like this, right? So I don't know if you can tell just by looking, but my spine is curved inward this way instead of the nice, lovely S shape that it's supposed to be. But this is pretty standard. If you didn't know me, this would look normal. And then to stand up, I see a lot of this. People shift you can't see my feet, but I'm shifting them back. And then they lift their shoulders and push up like that. That's really, really common, but it is not efficient. And it can cause lasting permanent damage to your spine. So the way you would want to sit, and a thing that I always say is head leads, body follows. So you have to reframe your thinking to think of your head as your skull, not your face. So by the way, your jaw is, this sounds a little gross. I don't know how squeamish everyone is. I'm not at all. I'm super sciencey. But your jaw is not part of your skull. It is an appendage. So think of the bottom of the front of your skull as your cheekbones, and the bottom of the back of your skull. You can feel them, these little knobbly bits on the back of your skull. That's the bottom of the back of your skull. So these things.
Everybody's touching their skulls.
Everyone should be touching their skulls. So if you put your thumb on your cheeks and your index finger on your occiput, those two things are what should be parallel to the floor.
Cool.
So not your chin, and definitely not looking down, but cheeks and occiput to the floor. Okay. So then, so I'll start over. So to sit down, first off, I want to bend my knees, send my hips back and head forward, and then I just land. And I typically don't use the back of the chair, like almost never. And here's why. If I were to lean back, where is my head in relation to my pelvis?
I'm just
Everyone say it out loud.
absolutely loving your cat. Sorry.
I'm so sorry. She just found her favorite toy, so she's gonna be really
Don't
noisy.
be sorry, I love cats.
Her name is Lyra, and she's a sweetheart, and she has this ginormous fluffy tail. Okay, so if I use the back of the chair, my head is now behind my pelvis, if behind is that way, right? Yeah. And what you may not be able to see is that when I sit like this, the muscles along the front of my neck are working. And the one thing I want to do is no extra work in my neck. If you can imagine doing an x-ray of yourself, of your spine in particular, you would see all the cervical spine. So there's 7 bones that make up your neck. And we think of our neck as somehow separate from our back, but it's the whole thing. Your spine begins here, really, really high up. You can feel, sorry if you can't hear me, you can feel that little notch where your spine begins, and it goes all the way down through to your coccyx, which is your tailbone. That is one structure. So whatever you do up here affects all the way through your axial skeleton. So it's very important to not use any excess tension through your neck. Who knew it would take so long to sit down and stand up, right? Okay, so once I'm sitting, I want to make sure that my lumbar curve is curved. What most people tend to do is undo it like this. This looks pretty normal, but it is very damaging. Like, I'm not joking, because you can scoliate yourself by sitting like this for too long. When I do like this, I'm undoing my lumbar curve and exaggerating my cervical curve. And they really want to be doing the same thing at the same time. So whether you're sitting just waiting for the bus, or if you're in rehearsal and your conductor is rehearsing the strings and you're an oboist, there's no need to do this. This is not helping anyone. If you stay like this, then you're ready to play, but you also can breathe and just exist. This is always better than whatever slouch you tend to do. So this is how I would sit. I'm sitting on my sit bones. Here's a little thing you can do. If you're not super familiar with anatomy, which most people aren't, our school system is a mess. But if you just put your hands on your butt, like you're holding your buttons like this, and then just lift one leg and then lift the other one, then you can feel your ischial tuberosities, which we call the sits bones. And that's where you want to be seated. You do not want to slump back onto your sacrum, because it causes a lot of damage. Can I give a scary speech?
Of course. Yeah, that's what we're here for.
This is my alarmist speech about bones and bone tissues. We forget that bones are tissue, right? So we can see hair grow, we can see our skin change, you know, like if you get a sunburn, it peels off, or if it's winter, you may be fairer. Not me, this one don't change, but you may be fairer than in the summer. We see those things, and like, you know, your teeth fall out and they come back in and stuff like that. But you can't see your bones. However, your bones are made of tissue. It's just confusing to us because when we think of tissue, we think of soft things like the inside of your mouth or the muscle linings and stuff like that. But your bones are literally tissue and they regenerate. Bones do not move themselves. Muscles move bones around, right? Which makes sense, and it sounds stupid to say out loud, but we just don't think about it frequently enough. So if you move your muscles, if your muscles move your bones into a particular configuration for a long enough period of time, which is to say years, your bones will grow into that shape. So people like you and I, for instance, are old enough to have scoliated ourselves. Are you familiar with this term, scoliosis, right? Okay, so we're old enough that we've done some sort of habit long enough to change the way our skeleton is shaped permanently, right? So my one is, the clearest one is, like most people my age, I sat like this on one leg, right? Throughout probably most of middle and high school. So that's a long time, right? And now this feels comfortable. So sitting like this would have felt wrong.
Wow.
And that's our biggest hurdle, I think, in AT, is noticing this is my habit, this feels comfortable. I know that this is better, but this is not comfortable and feels wrong. The problem with that is, since I did that for such a long time, it changed the way my pelvis is shaped. And your sacrum, the bottom part of your spine that's shaped like a shield, fits inside of the pelvis. So if you move your pelvis, you're moving your spine by necessity. It's impossible to move your pelvis without moving your spine. So now my pelvis, instead of being symmetrical like that, is shifted sort of like that. That's important to know if I'm going to run or walk. I don't want my feet to look symmetrical. I want my left foot to be tilted in slightly and my right foot to be pointed out slightly. Otherwise, I'll hurt my hips, knees, and ankles.
Wow.
So that's only half of my scary speech about bones, but it's very, very important that we all understand where we should be putting weight and where we should not. And the simplest explanation, like, it's very reductive, but it sticks with you, is big bones and big muscles do work. Little bones and little muscles are for balance and stability. So if you are doing something like sitting, you need your big muscles and big bones to be doing work, which in this case are going to be the pelvis, and then even the lumbar and abdominal muscles. That's where all the work should be happening. And your neck shouldn't be doing anything. It should just be a tensegrity model, keeping your skull poised on top of your spine.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so I'm gonna, you've been so clear. You have you're very good with words and to show exactly what you mean. So I'm gonna, for those who are not familiar with Alexander technique, I'm gonna ask you a little bit about the origins and who was Frederick Alexander, why did he need to develop these methods, and how did it all start?
Sure. Okay, so Hi, Lara. F.M. Alexander was an actor. He's from Australia. He was also kind of racist. I would not recommend reading his first two books, just putting that out there. So he was from Australia, but he moved to London to become an actor. And this is, like I said, late 1800s. So before Stanislavski, before microphones, when acting was really just loud oration. So he noticed that he would lose his voice before a performance was over, and it began to threaten his career. So he did everything that was available at the time, which was nothing really. It was like vocal rest, lozenges, like hot water with lemon and maybe some tea and stuff. And his voice would come back, but then when he got back on stage, the same thing happened again. He started out fine, but by the end of the performance, his voice was gone. So he started to get really worried. So he started to form relationships with behavioral scientists, anatomists, and biologists who were all in London. This was a period of a lot of growth in London, Victorian England. But the most important thing he did was he bought a full-length mirror and he began to watch himself. So he would try to get in the mind frame of performance and stand in front of the mirror. And he noticed when he took a deep breath to begin speaking, it looked like this. Right? So his head was pulling back and down, blah, 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 blah. And not only that, you can see, we would say I'm sticking my chest out, but what's actually happening is I'm compressing between my shoulder blades. We forget about our backs because all the interesting stuff is on the front. So he pulls back and down with his head and compresses between his shoulder blades. So we know that now as accessory breathing. Have you heard that term before? Okay, so accessory breathing is when it's like panting. It's breathing with just your upper ribs, and it's a manipulation of the torso. That's not good breathing, which is why when you feel anxious or you're having a panic attack, you're breathing more quickly, but it feels like you're not getting any oxygen. And the reason that's happening is because muscles are aerobic. They need oxygen to function. And if you're using your muscles to pull in air and oxygen, your muscles are already using that oxygen, so they cancel each other out. So it's useless. The other side of that is belly breathing, which you may have experienced in like a yoga class or something similar, where they're like, breathe in for 4 counts and hold, breathe out for 4 counts and hold, and stuff like that. And that's fine if you feel comfortable doing that in yoga class, but that is a manipulation of breath. It's not all the time breath, right? So when we're breathing, just to sit here or to exercise or to play a wind instrument or sing, we have to have a coordination through the whole system. So the diaphragm, your belly isn't involved. The diaphragm squishes your abdominal organs, and that's why it looks like your belly is moving. But you need your diaphragm to be the main orchestrator of breathing. Lungs don't have any muscle tissue. They can't move on their own. You can't make them stronger. That's not a thing. They're just bladders. But what you can do is change what you're doing with your intercostal muscles, the ones that go between your ribs. So anyway, so yeah, he studied all of that and began to notice how important the atlanto-occipital joint is. And he actually called it the primary control. So that structural element is called the primary control because it affects the rest of us. Oh, there's a super fun experiment you can do. Can I say it?
Oh, please.
So hello everyone. If you are in a place where you are with someone else, you're not completely alone, you have any other person where you can do this experiment, I highly recommend it. Here's how it works. You have your person stand in front of you, facing away from you like you're standing in line, and you gently, with hands like this, place your hands on their head, like right above their ears like this, and just gently move their head around and see what it feels like to do nothing. That's your control. They're not trying to help you and they're not trying to prevent you. Just move gently and then switch and they'll do it to you. That's your control. And then switch back. And this time, person in front, the only thing they change is they make really angry fists down by their side, like this, you know? And then you move their head again and just see what happens. And then switch places. And then the third one would be to tense your buns, like tense your buns and try and move each other's heads and just see what happens.
Cool.
It's super exciting because if you have a habit of tensing through your shoulder girdle, then holding fists makes it really hard to move your head. And if you have the habit of tensing through your lower body, then clenching your butt together makes it really hard to move your head. It's absolutely fascinating.
So this is an experiment to remember once social distancing is over.
Or if you are quarantined with someone. Yes.
Just joking. All right. So I'm going to ask you if there is any particular advice you would give to musicians. I mean, you've mentioned some that are, I believe, probably more of long-term, you know, posture correction and things like that, which I guess somebody can tell you that, but it's very difficult to learn that just because somebody tells you. So working through sessions might be extremely helpful for people to become more conscious about what their own bodies. But is there any other advice you could give to musicians, say, for example, to prepare for rehearsals, something to do to avoid injuries?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you a thing for before and after rehearsal, but while you're in rehearsal, while you're paying attention to sitting on your sits bones and extending your lumbar curve, what comes up a lot is most instruments are require you to be in an asymmetrical posture. You know, like clarinet, thankfully, is pretty, aside from this hand position, is you at least get to put your arms in front of you similarly.
As opposed to...
as opposed to violin, transverse flute, the cello, the bass, like almost everything else. Saxophone and bassoon, the ones that kind of go off this way, very, very, very tricky. Yeah. So what I would ask is for you to prioritize lengthening through your neck before you even get to rehearsal. Remember when you were a kid and you first got your hands on an instrument, you weren't allowed to just play straight away. You had to learn to hold it, right? So I would encourage everyone to think about lengthening or finding some freedom in their neck. Now, every time I say that to new people, they go kind of like this, like wiggling around. Don't do that. That's just adding more tension. So think of it as like if you have a fist and I asked you to let go of a fist, nobody does this, right? That's way more tension. If you have a fist and you want to let go, you just let go. So if you have tension through your neck, like this, or like that, where you can see these pointing, just let go of it, okay? And then really focus on how you're holding the instrument. And if it's two parts, like a string instrument, do one at a time. I'm gonna take the body of the violin and place it here. And I'm not gonna meet it yet because I wanna think about how I move my head toward it. And then I'll take the bow and really think about how I'm using my arm so that I keep width across my shoulder girdle. And gosh, I wish we had like 10 of these. This should be a 10-part session. When you move your arm, your shoulder blade should go down. So what most people tend to do when they lift their arm is thing, and you want to avoid that and just lift. Think of like a ballet dancer. Your shoulder blade goes down as your arm comes up. Every time you move something in your body, something else has to counterbalance it. Otherwise, it's way too much effort. So I would say that to prepare for rehearsal, just before you even get to rehearsal, when you're in the practice, well, eventually when you're in the practice room, but now when you're in your homes, just practice holding the instrument and getting it to your body however you need to, whatever your instrument is. That being said, there's a whole activity called active rest, which is beneficial for literally every single body in the whole world. It's almost like a magic wand. Would you like to know more?
I'd love to know more.
Okay, I'm gonna have to get on the floor, so give me a moment here. So active rest is an activity to release tension through your system. It does involve lying on the floor. We're using gravity to help release excess tension, especially along the spine, throughout the shoulders, and throughout the hips. But it also trains you, and this is what I think a lot of people tend to forget, it trains you to pay attention to your internal environment. Think of yourself as a microcosmos. Everything inside of you is contained, but there's tons of internal movement happening all of the time. It's a vibrant collection of systems that work together in harmony, ideally. And while you're able to pay attention to that, you're practicing paying attention to your internal environment and your external environment at the same time in a quiet moment. This is important because when you're in a high stress environment, we tend to shut our brains off as it regards our use of. But the more you can practice, bring it into stressful moments like driving or a really tense rehearsal. We've all had those rehearsals where we've gone unprepared and the conductor may lose their patience with us, you know?
Never. It never happens.
I'm sure it never happens. Never at UC Davis, but okay, so I'm going to show you how to get into the position, and then I'll show you what the position looks like. And then maybe, is it okay if I email you the instructions and maybe you can share them?
Absolutely, yeah. And what I'm going to do.
This is way too much to remember.
Yeah, what I'm going to do also is, offer some way of contacting you, whether an email address or a website or something, so that people can reach out to you. I mean, you're very generous with your time and everything you're showing, but obviously there's a limited time everybody can learn in one session. But I would encourage everybody to reach out to you and see if they can do a remote session with you, because it will be extremely beneficial.
Yeah, that would be great, because even though this is the first of 10 sessions, there's always more to learn.
Definitely.
Just kidding. Okay. So from standing, this part doesn't super matter. I like to go to all fours, like this, very stable. And then I go into what Pilates people call Mermaid. So I'm sitting on my left hip. If I'm sitting on my left hip, I'm going to ground myself with my right hand, right? So hip, opposite hip and hand. So I ground myself with my right hand, and I take my left hand and slip it through like this. I'm going to keep looking at the floor where I want my head to go, and then just unroll. Oops, I have a clip again. Right, so the difference being, most people want to lay down like this and then sit up like this, which involves a lot of strain on the front of your neck. And that's the exact thing we're trying to avoid. So left hip, right hand, bonk. And then I thread my left arm through, keep looking down, and then unroll. And that way I'm not using too much neck muscles. Now this is the basic position for active rest. You want your feet to be slightly wider than your hips. Can you see me okay?
Yeah.
You want your feet to be slightly wider than your hips. That way you're not using your adductors too much. Your arms have a whole lot of options. Basically, the only fast rule is do not let your humerus touch your ribs, because that can impede your breath coordination. This is pretty standard. I usually end up right here because I can feel my ribs when I breathe. It depends on how your elbow is shaped. You can also do something like this, or arms straight out, which I don't really have the room to do. Just anything so that your upper arm, your humerus, does not touch your ribs. And then from here, there's like a whole slew of instructions that would take too long to go through now, which is why I'd like to email them to you. But it's me walking you through what to think about. And so, 10 or 15 minutes later, it's time to get up. Now, this is a developmental movement thing that looks really weird, but feels really good. So when we were babies, our first major accomplishment was being able to roll from our backs to our bellies. It's like a huge, huge deal, right? So we all did it, so you know you can still do it. Okay, so when I'm done, I like to extend my legs out and put my arms down. This is called the anatomical position. My palms are facing toward the ceiling. And to get up, I'm gonna do what we call a spiral. Now, the thing is, if I only look sideways, I'm stuck right here. I'm only using my cervical spine, which is not great. So instead of just looking sideways, I look sideways and up overhead to my perspective, so like that. So I let my eyes lead my head and my head lead my spine. So it kind of looks like this. And I drag my head instead of lifting it. And if I keep going, I flip over.
Wow.
I know it looks kind of creepy.
No, it's just, you're so skillful.
Yeah, we all have it. We all can do it. It's just a matter of really just letting go through your torso. So I'm going to show you one more time. Look with your eyes, look overhead, drag your head. So you're not lifting, you're dragging, and it just flips you over. Boop.
Cool.
And then I come to all fours. Some people like to get up like that. I have really bad knees from having loose ligaments and juvenile arthritis. So what I do is I just flip my toes under and then go into kind of a downward dog and just kind of walk up and straighten up like that. And that's active rest.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to encourage people and give them the option of contacting you. And I'm sure many of these things, I mean, ideally an in-person session, because some of it might be, you know, manipulation in terms of what you show and how you touch. But I'm sure a lot of it can be accomplished also remotely during these times.
Yes. So I would love, love, love to be able to put hands on everyone, because that makes it like so, so much better. But obviously that's not an option. So we're just kind of making it work with visual, visual interaction, as well as me getting you to develop your own observation skills and your proprioception. So if I asked you right now, what is your left knee doing? If I hadn't said that, you would have had no idea. But as soon as it's like saying, don't think of zebras, then you think about zebras. And that's kind of what we're doing. But I want you to, like, your whole body is full of zebras. So you have to think about your whole body all of the time. So at first it's very exhausting and it can be frustrating. But the more you practice it, the more sophisticated your observation skills become. And the faster and easier release happens.
Wonderful. Well, Noel, thank you so very much for your time, your generosity. You've been so clear, and it's been wonderful to chat with you.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for asking, and I'm here when you need me.
Wonderful. I'll make sure I'll pass on your details so that people can get a hold of you. Thanks so
Great.
much. Take care.